Good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Purdy. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Briscoe Center, and I am so pleased to have you join us this evening. I'm here to welcome you to tonight's program with Jeffrey Toobin and Don Carleton. Before we begin the substance of the program, just a few notes for you. You are all invited to join us after the reception. We're going to be hosting a reception and book signing at the Briscoe Center, and we'll have copies of Homegrown available for purchase and signing. We're located just up the stairs and across the breezeway, and if you need help getting there, please flag down one of our staff members. I know the basement of this building can be a little bit of a labyrinth. I'm also excited to share with you that you'll have an opportunity to see our newest exhibition. It's called Through Her Lens, the Photojournalism of Diana Walker. It's a retrospective exhibit of Diana's work that showcases her iconic photos from an over 40-year career as one of the top photojournalists in the country. It officially opens on September 27th, but you will have a chance to take a look tonight. The doors are open. It is spectacular. So please join us after the program. Tonight's program has been quite some time in the making. When we learned that Mr. Toobin was conducting research for his next book in our collections, specifically in the Stephen Jones Oklahoma City bombing collections, we knew we wanted to invite him back to discuss his work in more depth. And so we're here tonight to discuss Homegrown, Timothy McVeigh, and the rise of right-wing extremism. On the morning of April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Inside was a powerful bomb made out of a deadly cocktail of fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. McVeigh, who lit 2 timed fuses as he was parking his truck, got out, locked the door, and headed towards his getaway car. At 9:02 a.m., the bomb exploded. As Mr. Toobin writes in Homegrown, there were 600 people inside the Murrah building. Of those, 163 were killed, including 15 of the 21 children in the daycare center. 4 people died nearby, 3 in office buildings across the street, and 1 in the parking lot. One rescuer, a nurse, was killed inside the building when she was struck by falling debris. The bomb damaged 324 buildings in a 50-block area of downtown Oklahoma City. The explosion was felt 55 miles away and registered a 6.0 on the Richter scale. And as a result of the bombing, 30 children were orphaned and 219 lost at least one parent. In Homegrown, Toobin maps out the bombing and its aftermath, including a detailed look at the federal investigation and prosecution led by Merrick Garland, and the inner workings of McVeigh's defense team led by Stephen Jones. Toobin also provides a comprehensive portrait of McVeigh and his main collaborator, Terry Nichols, and the political beliefs and political rage that motivated them. Mr. Toobin traces a direct line from McVeigh's radical worldview to the same principles and tactics that underscore the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The book is an outstanding example of how our collections can be used to generate new scholarship and a better understanding of our shared past. As the New York Times noted, and this is their wording, not mine, the more intriguing parts of the book come from the descriptions of the legal wrangling, much of it informed by the case files donated by Jones to the Briscoe Center. Tonight, we'll hear how those collections came to us and their importance to Toobin's research. And now let me introduce our speakers. Dr. Don Carleton is the founding executive director of the Briscoe Center and holds the J.R. Parton Chair in the Archives of American History here at UT Austin. He's the author of 13 books, including Red Scare, Conversations with Cronkite, Struggle for Justice, 4 Decades of Civil Rights Photography, and most recently, The Governor and the Colonel, a dual biography of William P. Hobby and Ovita Culp Hobby. He's also the executive producer of 2 PBS documentaries, When I Rise and Cactus Jack, Lone Star on Capitol Hill. He served as chief researcher and historical advisor for former CBS newsman and anchor Walter Cronkite's best-selling memoir, A Reporter's Life, and the television miniseries Cronkite Remembers. In 2015, the Texas Democracy Foundation honored Dr. Carleton with its Bernard Rappaport Award for his work in support of the First Amendment. New York Times bestselling author Jeffrey Toobin earned his bachelor's degree from Harvard College and graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. He served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Brooklyn and as an associate counsel in the office of independent counsel Lawrence E. Walsh, an experience that provided the basis for his first book, Opening Arguments, A Young Lawyer's First Case, United States versus Oliver North. He moved from government and the practice of law into full-time writing in the 1990s. His books include American Heiress, The Oath, The Nine, Too Close to Call, A Vast Conspiracy, and The Run of His Life. Mr. Toobin was a longtime chief legal analyst for CNN. He lives with his family in New York. Please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage.
Well, let's address the technical aspects of this. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Now you can hear me.
Well, I appreciate that introduction, Aaron, and I want to thank you.
Especially the part of me being a young lawyer. It's a long time ago. God.
Well, you were, yeah.
I was at one point, yeah.
All right. Also, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's a very special occasion for us, and I really want to also thank you now, Jeff, for agreeing to participate in this. And Jeff, as Aaron mentioned, will be going with us next door for a book signing. So we hope you can all join us there. Jeff, before I start interrogating you and throwing some do an inquisition here on the book, I want to say a few words about how this collection for the Oklahoma City bombing wound up at the Briscoe Center here in Austin, Texas. Stephen Jones, who was Timothy McVeigh's court-appointed attorney, contacted me completely out of the blue in 1998 and asked if the center had any interest at all in housing his defense files for Timothy McVeigh. And he also said that he wondered if we would also accept the records of the federal court, the trial records as well. I had heard of Jones because of the massive news coverage that the whole event generated, but I had never met him personally. I later learned that Stephen was a University of Texas Austin graduate, and that he represented several other controversial clients in Oklahoma prior to the bombing case. One of those clients that he represented, interestingly enough, had been anti-war activist Abbie Hoffman, who Stephen successfully represented in a lawsuit against the University of Oklahoma for having banned Hoffman from speaking on campus. Coincidentally, the Briscoe Center would later acquire Abbie Hoffman's papers, so it's interesting to get those two together. Now, in that phone call in 1998, Stephen warned me that the Oklahoma City bombing collection itself was not only huge in size, I think Aaron mentioned over 600 boxes, but also very controversial. The archive itself was controversial. And so he wondered if that was going to be a problem. He was concerned. I asked him, I said, well, why do you want it in Texas? And he said that because he feared for the archive's security in Oklahoma. I can't confirm or not, anything about that, but that was Stephen Jones's feeling about it, because the emotional, the anger and the emotions that whole event, evoked with so many the families of victims. And Stephen, being a court-appointed attorney, felt that he was already getting lots of hate mail and was being attacked by folks there in Oklahoma for representing Timothy McVeigh. And so he was he had a problem. He really was worried about, he thought this whole record needed to be preserved for history. And he just didn't accurately or not, he didn't trust leaving it in Oklahoma. So, and the other thing is, as I've later learned, he didn't tell me at the time, but being a University of Texas graduate, made it sort of a natural connection for him. And so I told Stephen that I really wasn't concerned or worried about it being controversial, I wasn't concerned about it being large. We have much larger collections than this collection, although it is a large collection. The collection documents a major event in American history, and the center's mission is to acquire and make available any material that sheds light on the nation's past, whether it be happy or unhappy. That's not our role. Our role is to preserve this material. Richard Match, the federal judge who presided over the trials of both McVeigh and Terry Nichols, approved the transfer of all the records that fell under his jurisdiction, which was basically the prosecution in that case. That was an even larger portion of the collection, actually. And he approved the transfer, and so we moved the entire archive to Austin. So, as a historian, once we received the collection, I was keenly aware of the collection's value for historical research, as I mentioned before. But I made a decision against the center generating publicity about the acquisition. I was concerned about the negative impact on the feelings of the families of the victims if we released press releases and came across some way as being boastful. I just didn't want to go there. So word about our having a collection was really word of mouth for quite a while. And then we started getting researchers. Well, actually, we had to process the collection first, but once we had it cataloged, it's really been heavily used ever since. And so the word was out a long time ago without us having to have a press conference or do publicity or release press releases. I want to really publicly thank Stephen Jones and the late federal judge Richard Match for making it possible for the Briscoe Center to preserve the records of the McVeigh trial. And it's an incredibly important event in the history of our country. Now, Jeff, so Aaron Purdy laid out the basic facts of what happened on that day. So what I want to do is really focus on some of the issues that you address in your marvelous book. Now, you covered the trials as a journalist, a legal journalist, I guess, the trials of both Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols in 1997. And I should add here that the Briscoe Center also houses the papers of the esteemed attorney Michael Tiger, who was Terry Nichols' attorney. This was in 1997 when you were covering the case. So what brought you back to the story of the Oklahoma City bombing?
Okay. Well, as my dad used to say, to make a long story unbearable, I didn't cover the bombing, but I covered the trials. The trials were separated, and they were both before Judge Mage in Denver, the change of venue, first McVeigh, then Nichols. And, they were interesting trials, not very, the results were pretty preordained. The case was very strong. But I didn't write a book about that then. I did some coverage, mostly for TV. I was at ABC at the time. And then sort of moved on with my career for quite some time. But, having covered these big trials, the stories had been rattling around in my head. The big turning point for me took place in October of 2020, when, as I suspect many of you remember, the FBI arrested a number of people in Michigan who had been plotting to kidnap Governor Whitmer. And I got interested in that case, and I saw that the people were all affiliated in one way or another with the Michigan militia. Having covered the Oklahoma City bombing case, I knew that Terry Nichols, the co-defendant, was also from Michigan, also affiliated with the Michigan militia. And I thought, that's interesting. I wonder if there's any connection. Well, it turned out there was a connection. It was an ideological connection predominantly, that there was a clear connection in terms of what their issues of interest were. But there were even some people who overlapped, even though a quarter century had passed. Then, so I was, but it was then only a few weeks later that January 6th happened. And again, I saw what seemed to be ideological affinities between the Oklahoma City defendants and the new group, which got me back thinking, maybe there is a book here. I wish I could remember exactly how, but it was probably just Googling that I got to the Briscoe Center. And I found this incredible archive. And this is a wonderful opportunity for me to say thank you publicly. I say thank you in the acknowledgments of my book, but just this book owes its existence to the Briscoe Center in a very profound way. This is an archive unlike any other, and I've covered law and trials for a long time, like any other in the entire, in American history. I think it is safe to say that. It is also a brilliantly organized archive. I've never been able to work successfully with research assistants, so it's just me. And the good news was there were 635 boxes. The bad news was there were 635 boxes. But the Briscoe Center did this marvelous index, which allowed me to zero in on what was genuinely useful. And I found that, Stephen Jones had turned over everything, including interviews with all of his witnesses, all of his interviews with his client, all of his legal memos, internally. And I don't know if there are any lawyers in the crowd or anybody who's ever heard of the attorney-client privilege. But you may say to yourself, can you do that? And the answer is, I don't think so. Stephen has this theory that McVeigh waived the privilege, blah, blah, blah. And I discussed this in an author's note. I talked to lawyers about this, and they cannot believe that Jones did this. But as an attorney, I thought, it's not my problem. I'm a journalist. This is fantastic. So in this file, in these boxes, you have not only all of Jones' interactions with his client, but you have all the discovery that the government turned over to the defense, including all of the FBI interviews, known as 302s, thousands of these. And so you get both, in a normal case, the only thing that's public is what's released, what comes out in court or what's filed by the lawyers in court, the papers. Here you have the behind-the-scenes story of both sides. You have the FBI investigation and the defense side. You never get that. So I was able to tell a story in a kind of depth that I certainly had never been able to do before, and it was tremendously enriching to me as a writer, and it's all owed to the Briscoe Center because of its excellence, and of course to Stephen Jones because of, shall we say, his eccentricity.
Well, I have to tell you, when Stephen called me and told me what he had, and he really got into detail on the telephone and about his papers. Yeah. As Jeff is saying, there are actually two, you sort of say two archives. One's the defense and one's the prosecution. And he didn't mention the prosecution right at first. He was focused on his collection. But anyway, and this, he told me, described that he had all this stuff of McVeigh's and discussions and stuff. And I did question him at the time. And I said, Stephen, I'm not an attorney. But did he, oh, well, no, I said, can you do this? How are we going to handle this? There's this attorney-client privilege issue. Because we have a legal history archive that we're building, and we have the papers of other attorneys. And they have embargoed sections of their papers that have even raised the question. I mean,
Right.
And he said...
And by the way, I mean, McVeigh was executed in 2001, and some people think, well, he's dead, so the attorney-client privilege is dead. That's not the law. The attorney-client privilege, this is well established that the attorney-client privilege survives the death of the client, but...
Well, so Stephen told me, I expressed my concern, and Stephen said, no, Tim waived his rights to that. And I said, are you sure? He said, yeah, absolutely. Everything's cool and everything. Well, I kind of took the same, I took the same approach that you did, except not as a journalist, but as a historian.
Well, but it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our interests are different. And the attorney-client privilege is something that belongs to the client. Yeah. It doesn't belong to the lawyer. It belongs to the client. And that's whose interest is being protected. The whole thing is so bizarre.
My reaction is like yours, though, in the sense that, okay, we'll sort this out. Let's preserve this stuff. And, and for history's sake. Right. And so I'm glad that, we proceeded that way. And here we've got this book as a result. Yeah. So let's go back just a little, before the Oklahoma City bombing, the event itself happened, the siege of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco by federal law enforcement in 1993 seems to have been a touchstone moment for McVeigh. You want to elaborate a little on it?
It was, and the terrible conflagration at the Branch Davidian compound, where 76 people died, was on April 19th, 1993, and McVeigh very intentionally picked that day for the bombing. He also picked it because that was the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington in 1775, and he very much identified with the Founding Fathers. This was, again, one of the weird connections between McVeigh and the January 6 people, this sort of strange obsession with the idea that we are the real heirs of the colonists who rebelled against the British. And McVeigh had memorized much of the Declaration of Independence, not the famous part, not just the famous part, the beginning, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but the part where Jefferson explains his justification for the rebellion against the British, and he very much saw himself as an heir. Yes, it is true that Waco was one of the things that motivated McVeigh. He even went to Waco during the siege and tried to bear witness. But I sometimes think it is overstated as the sole justification for the bombing. Just as important as April 19th is the date September 13th, 1994, because that's the day that Bill Clinton signed the assault weapons ban. And that was as much of a motivation for McVeigh as was Waco. The obsession with guns and the belief that the Second Amendment was a guarantor of your citizens' ability to buy any gun at any time was just as motivating a factor here as McVeigh's obsession with Waco was. And I think as we look forward to the influence of these ideas, the idea of gun rights as sacrosanct and under threat from the federal government is as central to the motivations here, and it was in the Whitmer attempted kidnapping, and it was on January 6th as well.
Yeah, but you do a great job of connecting all of those in the book. Something else in his background too that I want to explore a little bit, or get you to explore, and that's the Turner Diaries. I don't know how many people in here know anything about the Turner Diaries, but maybe you could tell us what the Turner Diaries are and its connection.
The Turner Diaries it's a novel, and it was privately published in 1978 and picked up by a series of small right-wing presses, but became a tremendous cult favorite. McVeigh discovered it through the ads in the back pages of National Rifle Association magazines. It had a tremendous influence on him. Just to briefly summarize the plot of the Turner Diaries, it is the story of then contemporary America, except that the federal government has been taken over by a sinister cabal of blacks and Jews. And the first thing they do is pass a law called the Cohen Act. It's a very subtle name thing there, which calls for the confiscation of all privately owned firearms. That's the first thing this evil federal government does. Again, the gun obsession. Earl Turner is someone who wants to lead a rebellion against this government, and the way he does it is he gets a truck, big panel truck, fills it with ammonium nitrate fertilizer and fuel oil, parks it outside the federal FBI building in Washington, sets a fuse, walks away, and it blows up and kills 700 people. That in turn leads to a broader rebellion against this evil federal government, ultimately a civil war, the white people win, everybody lives happily ever after. And McVeigh very intentionally modeled the Oklahoma City bombing on the bombing of the FBI building in the Turner Diaries. That is the easiest point to draw from A to B, because that's, it's a truck bomb outside a federal building.
Well, is that the reason he picked the federal building?
Well, yes. One of the odd things about the planning of this was that in many respects, it was extremely detailed. It was very complicated to assemble the ingredients, to know how to mix them, know how it worked. But how they picked the Oklahoma City, the Alfred P. Murrah building, was a rather haphazard process. McVeigh didn't want to go to Washington. He wanted to be in the heartland. He also had never been to Washington. He knew there'd be a lot of security, but he very much wanted to bomb a federal building. Mm-hmm. But, and he looked around. He looked in Phoenix, he looked in Little Rock, he looked in Dallas, and he never found one building that that all the federal government was concentrated in. And in Oklahoma City, he saw that the Murrah building had this big black glass front. He could pull right up to the front. And he knew he could inflict a lot of damage that way. The paradox, this sort of tragic paradox of the Oklahoma City bombing, and as much as horror was inflicted on Oklahoma City, it had very little to do with Oklahoma City. McVeigh had never been there before. He sort of after the fact kind of made up this rationale that, well, the people who gave the orders for Waco worked in the Murrah building. They didn't. The FBI was one federal agency in Oklahoma City that was not based in the Murrah building. It was just sort of a matter of the architecture and the accessibility. That's why he picked it.
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in Dallas, and I was thinking when I read that in the book, it was the first time I'd heard that McVeigh actually drove around Dallas, didn't he, looking for
he drove
for
around
targets?
Dallas, yes, he did.
it occurred to me, having, I'm old enough, I was living in Dallas when the Kennedy assassination occurred, and some of the other troubles that preceded the Kennedy assassination with Vice President Johnson at the time. And I was thinking about, my God, it's bad enough that he did this anyplace, okay? But I was just thinking about what the combination of doing it in Dallas with the reputation that Dallas still was suffering from the whole reputation that it had as being the place where John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
And the reason I know this story of how he picked the building is because of what I found in the Briscoe Center, because he told his lawyers how he picked it. I mean, all of those sorts of details came out in the papers from here.
Listen, I very much appreciate the very generous remarks you've made about how accessible the collection is and how well cataloged it is. Because that's a real kudo to my staff who actually do this work.
Who were so good to me. I mean, again, I don't want to go on too long about this, but I mean, I spent a bunch of time here at the Briscoe Center, but mostly what I did was designate stuff to be copied, right. And your poor staff had to copy all these pages and send me PDFs, and I was very grateful to them and very glad to thank them in the book.
Well, thank you for saying that. And some of the staff is here tonight, so I'm glad.
I hope so. Yeah. Hope they get some of the free wine at the dinner. Yeah.
So, let me go to another little kind of interesting point about this. And I remember you talking about in the book of how that McVeigh's military service actually played some role in his radicalization. Can you speak to that?
This was something I struggled with a lot because one of the things approximately 7% of the American public American adults are either veterans or active duty military. It's an interesting statistic, which I didn't know. But of the people who were arrested on January 6th, approximately 20% were veterans or active duty military, and that's gotten a lot of attention over the years. And of the more culpable and senior people, the Proud Boys, people like that, veterans are even more overrepresented. So the question I had was, does the Army radicalize you in this way, or are people who are predisposed to this sort of behavior attracted to the Army? And I don't know. I couldn't figure that out. I mean, I think, it's got to be some combination of the two. But McVeigh in particular, just to give you a little background about McVeigh. McVeigh grew up outside Buffalo, New York, and his father worked for 30 years in a GM plant there. His grandfather worked for 30 years in the same GM plant. By the time McVeigh came along, that plant was in precipitous decline, as was so much manufacturing in the Rust Belt. And economic decline was a big theme of McVeigh's life. He turned 18, graduated from high school, took a job as a security guard for a while. And then just sort of on the spur of the moment told his dad one day, another thing, his parents had a very rancorous divorce. His mother went to Florida with the two daughters, leaving the son behind. So there was this kind of weird Sophie's choice of like, I'm picking the daughters, not the mother, also not the son, kind of another psychologically significant event in his life. And he decides to enlist in the military. He's a very successful soldier. He's very good. He works. He was always a good marksman. As I said, he was obsessed with guns from teen years. Becomes a gunner in Bradley fighting vehicle, which is sort of a cross between a troop carrier and a tank. Serves with distinction in the brief First Gulf War. Wins a Bronze Star, and his great goal in his only real career goal that he ever had was to join the Special Forces and the Green Berets. He tries out for the Green Berets right after the Gulf War. It's a 21-day tryout, and he washes out after the second day. It's a big turning point in his life because he becomes rootless and restless, doesn't really want to doesn't stay in the military much longer. It's just about that. He returns to Buffalo, works again as a security guard. Bill Clinton gets elected in November of 92, and in basically the beginning of 93, he sets out on the road and starts going to gun shows and selling Turner Diaries at the gun shows, but really begins this process of being increasingly alienated, and it's only April of 95 that the bombing happened. So that period of Clinton's presidency is really the period of his deep radicalization.
So the Clinton presidency itself was also a motivation in a certain way, right? I'm talking about
absolutely not in a certain way.
Yeah.
I mean, in a real way. One of my mentors in journalism was Michael Kinsley, the former editor of the New Republic, and Mike always liked to say there are only two stories ever worth doing. One is it's worse than you think, and two is everything you thought you knew is wrong. This story illustrates that in a way, because the two things you hear most often about McVeigh are, to this day, to the extent he's remembered, and I hear this all the time, is he was a lone wolf and he was anti-government, both of which are fundamentally wrong. He and Nichols were a lone wolf in the sense that they did not have fellow co-conspirators in a legal sense, but he was out in the world as part of the right-wing radicalization that went on during the Newt Gingrich contract with America, when Rush Limbaugh was in his heyday. I remember where I was sitting in your reading room when I saw the documents talking about how much McVeigh loved Rush Limbaugh. That had never been reported before. He was a true ditto head. And this is where, it's hard journalistically, and this is something that I try to draw a line in the book. It's like the military. You don't want to write a book saying, well, veterans are crazy and they set off bombs. The vast, vast majority of veterans are wonderful law-abiding citizens. The vast, vast majority of people who listen to Rush Limbaugh are law-abiding citizens. But this is an indicator of what made him who he was. And that, to me, that drawing that line was very important to me, and it was so interesting to learn about the Limbaugh connection. Because
speaking of Clinton, you point out in the book that Clinton, when the explosion occurred, when that horrific thing happened, that he almost immediately saw it as a wider kind of thing, when in fact, and I may be misrepresenting what you said here, so correct me, the media and the supporters of people like Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, and the rhetoric that they were spewing out, quickly defaulted to a position of this nutcase. He's a lone wolf.
Right.
He has no connection to anything else. He's just a nutcase.
Let me just in general, but one of the most interesting things I did in connection with this book was interview President Clinton. When you interview someone that prominent, what you try to do, at least what I try to do, is, you gather as much outside facts as you can first, because you're not going to get a second interview with this person. So on the day of the bombing, on April 19th, there was a lot of speculation TV that this was Islamic radicalism.
Yeah.
It had been just a little more than 2 years since the first World Trade Center bombing, which was Islamic radicalism. Ramzi Youssef, who the mastermind of that, had just been arrested in early 1995, and that was very much in the air and on television. Clinton, on the day of the bombing, gave very appropriate remarks about, we're going to find out who did this. We have sympathy for the people in Oklahoma City. But he, of course, did not speculate publicly about who did it. But I learned back in the Oval Office, as they were talking about what was going on, people were saying to Clinton, they think it might be Islamic radicalism. And Clinton says to his staff, no, this wasn't Islamic radicalism. This was the militias. I know this was the militias. So I go to Bill Clinton. How did you know? And he said, because I dealt with them for 12 years as governor of Arkansas. And he went through chapter and verse of all the experiences he had. And this is, I'm doing this interview in 2022 about events in the early and mid 1980s. And Clinton is like names and places and dates. It's unbelievable. And now, of course, I went and checked him out. And he was basically right about all of it. I mean, crazy stuff like, there was a horrible right-wing extremist militia guy named Richard Snell, there was a shootout. One of the people was a sheriff killed in northern Arkansas who was Bill Clinton's county campaign coordinator in his campaign for governor. Another right-wing terrorist act killed an Arkansas state trooper. This Arkansas state trooper's brother was on Bill Clinton's security detail. I mean, Clinton was everywhere in Arkansas. And so he knew, or he predicted correctly, that he knew how dangerous these people were, and he was extraordinarily prescient about who they were and why they were doing what they were doing.
Let's clarify something. So he he was at the press conference where he talked about the tragedy, as you said, and everything. Did he ever actually express, though, as president, this whole thing about the right-wing militias and so forth?
You bet he did. You bet he did. In fact, now I think many people may remember, the bombing was on a Wednesday, I think, and on that Sunday, he went to Oklahoma City and gave a famous, wonderful speech about, sort of feeling the nation's pain and feeling the people's pain there. It's a beautiful speech, but that was not the speech. He gave a series of speeches, particularly one at Michigan State, because by that point, the Michigan militia connection was known, because when McVeigh was arrested, he had a driver's license where the home address was Terry Nichols' brother's farm in Michigan. And Terry Nichols' brother, James Nichols, was also involved in this right-wing political activity, including the militias. So that connection had already been made. And Clinton famously in this speech said, "You can't love your country and hate your government." Which is, the way he was talking about those people. And then he gave a speech to a press organization in Minneapolis, where he talked about voices of hate on the radio. And he didn't know for sure, no one knew for sure until I saw it at the Briscoe Center, that McVeigh was a dedicated Limbaugh listener. And Gordon Liddy was another from that time, very, right. And they, Liddy and Limbaugh in particular, after Clinton gave that speech talking about voices of hate on the radio, was highly offended. And it's like, I never told anybody to commit violence. And it was exactly like what Donald Trump said after January 6th. Mm-hmm. I never said, go commit one of the famous lines that Limbaugh had is, we are this close, and I'm holding my fingers a quarter of an inch apart to a second American Revolution right now. I mean, that's the kind of talk that was going on. And we can debate how much Donald Trump inspired the radicals on January 6th, and we're going to have a trial that's related, not exactly about that. But Clinton's ability to see how rhetoric has consequences was something that I was very struck by.
Why do you think that didn't get as much traction as maybe, looking back, it should have?
It got some...
that viewpoint, I'm saying.
It got some traction at the time, but the real reason why Oklahoma City fell out of the memory bank, not out of it, people knew about it, was 9/11.
Yeah.
September 11th, 2001, turned terrorism into an international problem, not a domestic problem. Now, to a certain extent, this was understandable. 18 times as many people died on 9/11 as died on April 19th. This was, a cataclysmic event in American history. However, it was also an event used for political purposes. A lot of people on the right used 9/11 as an opportunity to say, only Islamic terrorism is the problem, not domestic homegrown terrorism. There were even attempts. There was a congressman named Dana Rohrabacher from California who did a whole investigation aimed at proving that McVeigh and Nichols were actually working with Osama bin Laden. Idiotic, ridiculous, but revealing in the attempt to dissociate the right wing from terrorism and push it all into the foreign basket. But that's really what I think that's the main reason why Oklahoma City had. The other thing is, and I deal with this in my epilogue at some length. There's been a lot of right-wing violence in this country since 1995. When you put it all together, as I do, at least in summary form in this book, I was struck. There's a lot, and there are a lot of plots like the one with Michigan, with Whitmer, that fortunately were stopped before they were able to come to fruition. So, this is really out there.
You mentioned Terry Nichols, though. Let's go back a second to Terry, because maybe a lot of people, you may know the name is associated and so forth. What was give general overview of his role in this and how he got connected to McVeigh?
The easy answer to that is that McVeigh and Nichols met on the first day of basic training. But they had very different, though oddly parallel lives. Terry Nichols was from the thumb of Michigan, and he grew up on a small family farm that was struggling in what was then called the farm crisis. And just as McVeigh's life was a good indicator of industrial decline, Nichols' life was about agricultural decline and the struggles of family farmers. McVeigh had a sort of evil charisma. This guy was motivated and intelligent and really, had a tremendous will to power. Terry Nichols was a dope and a follower and a zero who enlisted in the military at age 33. He was much older than McVeigh. Basically, his wife convinced him to enlist in the military so she could divorce him like the next day. He washed out of the military very quickly. He was not like McVeigh. he was very much a participant in the conspiracy. On the April 17th, McVeigh and Nichols went to a little state park in north central Kansas outside Junction City, where they mixed the bomb, where they finally put the fertilizer and the fuel oil together in barrels. So, I mean, there's no question in my mind that that Nichols was also guilty, although Nichols did not go set it off. He was in Harrington, Kansas on the day of the bombing. But, as a co-conspirator, no question he was involved, but very much the junior partner in the enterprise.
So why did he get a life sentence and McVeigh got the death sentence?
For just that reason. I mean, he wasn't as culpable.
He wasn't there.
He was not there in Oklahoma City. He had gone with McVeigh to scout it, but he didn't go. And there are some questions about whether he really would have gone through with it in the way that McVeigh did.
I got that from the book.
Yeah, and we can never know that. But I think it's appropriate. I mean, it's very appropriate that he was convicted. And I have my own mixed feelings about the death penalty, so it doesn't bother me. He's now serving life without parole in the Supermax prison, federal prison in
Colorado,
outside Denver.
Yeah. So there's another name that pops out of the book that's very familiar to us now, but I don't think was very familiar to anyone at the time, and that's Merrick Garland. You want to talk a little bit about Merrick Garland's role in this?
This was fortuitous to me as a journalist. Merrick Garland in 1995 was effectively the senior aide to the Deputy Attorney General. He was a political appointee, real, legal superstar of his generation, top of his class at Harvard Law School, clerked for William Brennan on the Supreme Court, gave up a partnership at Arnold and Porter to become an assistant U.S. attorney, tried murder cases for a while. I mean, really, Janet Reno was the attorney general. Jamie Gorelick was the deputy attorney general. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, like the next day, there started to be turf fights about like who was in charge, and Gorelick sent Merrick there to be in charge. And it was a deeply moving and important experience in his life. I mean, he talked, yes. The other deeply moving and important experience in his life that was also taking place in April of 1995, it's often hard to remember events that are contemporaneous. In January of 1995, the O.J. Simpson criminal case started. Now you ask, why does that matter? Merrick Garland was appalled at how that case was unfolding. All the publicity it got, how the lawyers were becoming celebrities, how the case was going on for month after month. And Garland set out in a very intentional way not to make this the anti-OJ case. Narrowly focused, lawyers who kept to themselves, but he also didn't want to make it a political case, and he didn't want to emphasize McVeigh's political agenda. It was there, but not focused on. And one of the things I do in the book is I draw a contrast between McVeigh and Clinton. Their roles were very different at the time, but Garland has this real aversion to publicity. And you see it today as Attorney General. And that's why I think it's so significant, is that Garland has refused to call attention to the right-wing threat in this country the way Clinton did. And he would have the opportunity as Attorney General. Now, to Garland's credit, he's been courageous in bringing these cases. I don't think he gets enough credit in particular.
You mean the Trump?
The Trump, the whole Trump investigation. Right. It took a lot of guts, in particular, to approve the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. Mm-hmm. Imagine if they had gone into Mar-a-Lago with the FBI and found nothing. Can you imagine what that would have done to Garland and to the Justice Department? But he doesn't believe in the bully pulpit. He believes that the Justice Department only speaks in courtrooms. And I think that's a missed opportunity, because I think the risk in these circumstances is that, as what happened, with 9/11, is that events move on and we lose the reality of the threat of right-wing violence, and we allow people to say things like, well, the left is just as bad, what about Antifa? There are statistics and facts that show 75% of the political violence in this country comes from the right, about 15% comes from Islamic radicals, about 5% comes from the left, broadly defined. The threat here is from the right, and Garland doesn't talk about it much.
Do you see any trend? Do you see how, looking at Garland and how he prosecuted the McVeigh case, and now as Attorney General, you already mentioned that he's publicity shy, and that was the way he was when he was prosecuting the Oklahoma City case as well. He's kept that style and everything. But do you think he's a little bit more open about making the statements as you're talking about you don't see much change in the way he's approached?
No change. No, it's interesting. I mean, he really wanted to try the case. And again, this is an example of contemporaneous events that you don't remember. Jamie Gorelick said to him, you can't try the Oklahoma City bombing case because you got to get back here to Oklahoma City and catch the Unabomber, because the Unabomber keeps bombing all over the place and we can't catch this guy. And it's not until 1996 that, as you may recall, they published this crazy manifesto, and Ted Kaczynski's brother recognizes the style, and that leads to the arrest of Ted Kaczynski. But it's because of the Unabomber that McVeigh doesn't get to try the Oklahoma City case.
You made that statement about how...
Sorry? Garland.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, Mayor Garland.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Chan.
Thanks.
He's an accurate journalist sitting over there.
Absolutely. I'm glad we got one here. Let's talk, let's kind of focus here at the end on what struck me as being so important about this. I mean, as a historian, just the history of the event is absolutely fundamental, but making connections between the Oklahoma City bombing and Timothy McVeigh's actions and what we watched on January the 6th. And I think that's one of the really important points, or line of thinking, I guess is a better way of putting it. You want to...
Let me give you three examples.
Yeah.
The line from Oklahoma City to January 6th, the ideological links and the stylistic links between them. One, guns. I mentioned it earlier, but if you look at what was really motivating the people on January 6th, obviously, it was to make sure that Donald Trump remained president, not Joe Biden. But the reason they wanted Donald Trump to be in office is because he was going to protect their right to guns. Just a brief tangent here. The hated assault weapons ban that Clinton signed in '94 had a 10-year time horizon, and it expired in 2004, and was never renewed because George W. Bush was president. He wasn't going to do that. And what's happened with right-wing violence since then is that these people don't have to go to all the trouble of building a bomb anymore. They just buy an AR-15, and that's what the El Paso Walmart, the synagogue in Pittsburgh, Dylan Roof at the church in South Carolina, Uvalde, all of these are assault weapons because it's so much easier to go buy an AR-15 and shoot up a classroom, a store, the grocery store outside Buffalo, than it is to build a bomb. Plus, and this is another great Briscoe Center moment, when I saw McVeigh say to his lawyers, I can picture it on the document, I knew there was an army out there, but I just couldn't find them. Because he would go to these gun shows and, he didn't have the personality. What he didn't have was the internet and social media. And that's what makes it so much easier now. Just it's a point. Okay, but the 3 points I wanted to make. The first was guns. The second, and this is the one that was really surprising to me because I didn't really know much about this, is this obsession with the Founding Fathers. The prologue to my book is called 1776. And it's about what was going on January 6th. All of these people, like Alex Jones, like Congresswoman Boebert, all saying, we are the heirs of the colonists. We are the heir. This is the American Revolution. We are fighting a tyrannical federal government, just as the colonists were fighting the tyrannical British. That link is so consistent across the generation. And third is simply the belief that your cause is so just that you can engage in violence. Mm-hmm. That it's okay that you can break into the Capitol and try to lynch Nancy Pelosi because your cause is so just. And so the three links, and there are more, but the three that are guns, Founding Fathers, and violence.
Well, you touched on a point. I mean, Larry Wright is here and he's certainly perhaps the expert.
One of my former colleagues and current heroes, Larry Wright, right over here.
Larry is also, of course, the widely acknowledged expert on the 9/11. I don't know if anyone can touch him there, but it reminds me.
Larry's also from Texas. I know he writes about Texas sometimes. Yes, right. Yeah.
But, is this whole idea of the danger of righteous fanaticism. And that's the same thing. This pure, almost, I don't want to say religion necessarily, unfortunately sometimes it has a religious connection, but just this, this righteous fanaticism.
Yes, at a large level of abstraction, what Larry was writing about in the Looming Tower and Al Qaeda, is related to the fanaticism of Tim McVeigh in terms of I just guess fanaticism is probably the best word that you cannot. It's not enough. The marketplace of ideas isn't enough. That you need to impose your will by violence. What's important to and the distinction that I try to draw in my book very clearly is whatever Tim McVeigh was, he wasn't in Al Qaeda, and the efforts to try to make him into an ally of Al Qaeda because Congressman Rohrabacher or others want to pretend. There's a wonderful common moment in just a little thing that I found so revealing. Megyn Kelly, who used to be an anchor at Fox News and now is a freelance person. One of these mass shootings takes place in, I believe this one was Alabama. It was shooting up a movie theater where they were playing just an ordinary movie. And there's a reporter on the scene, and Megyn Kelly says, and I'm not going to do it perfect justice, is there any, she says to the reporter on the scene, is there any tie to Islam and what we understand to be terrorism in the United States? It's like she can't. Terrorism is Islamic terrorism to her, and it's one of those things that I'm sure she didn't think about what she was saying, but the unconscious link was, I thought, so revealing, but also, sort of where we were as a country for a long time.
So you think there's any possibility that was actually a conscious link?
I don't want to psychoanalyze Megyn Kelly.
we
I
don't
don't.
want to do
It's just
okay.
not my department, so I don't know what was conscious and unconscious.
I was going to put you on the spot
Yeah.
there, Jeff, is what I want to try. Okay, to kind of bring this to a close here, I want to quote you because I think it also needs more elaboration, okay? You write in your book, Homegrown, that the story of the Oklahoma City bombing, and this is a quote, is not just a glimpse of the past, but also a warning about the future.
That's cheerful, isn't it? Like many book writers, we had a lot of discussions about, what the title should be, and particularly the subtitle. My idea was how Timothy McVeigh tried to make America great again. Simon & Schuster thought that was a little on the nose. And they suggested, well, what about Timothy McVeigh and the birth of right-wing extremism? And even though that's not what my book is about, that wasn't the beginning of this. And if I may plug another book, which was extremely influential in my thinking in writing this book. Jefferson Cowie is a historian at Tulane University and he wrote a book called Freedom's Dominion, which is about a specific county in Alabama. And the line it happens to be the home county of George Wallace, and he talks about how hostility to the federal government has been a constant of right-wing extremism going back to the days of slavery, and it's just it goes through the Reconstruction, where the federal government was evil. It goes through the various legislative attempts to crack down on Jim Crow. It goes through Brown v. Board of Education, where the federal government is telling people to integrate the schools. I mean, that theme. McVeigh is part of that. And, I don't want to give the impression that I think, that this problem is, millions and millions of people. It's not millions and millions of people who are this extreme. But there are thousands of them, and they are out there, and the internet helps to radicalize them. So the risk that always comes up when you have a dramatic event like this is that the fever passes and the circus moves on, and people lower their guard. And I think the lesson of of this story is that it's an enduring threat, and we need to be aware of it.
How do we prevent that?
As I like to say, I do problems, I don't do solutions. It's really a hard problem. It's a hard question because, I do believe in the First Amendment, and I do believe that the internet should be largely a free exchange. And if people want to say that Bill Clinton or Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren are terrible or awful, and if Donald Trump wants to give a speech that says you have to fight for what you believe in, he should be allowed to do that. I mean, so how you regulate that and how you tease out the genuine threats from the mere rhetoric it's really a hard problem, and I just don't have a solution. Sorry.
Well, see, I have the easy out when people ask me as a historian to, predict the future about something or whatever. And I say, well, I'm sorry, the future doesn't exist. I only deal with what's happened.
Okay, that's good. I may steal that. That's
so
good. Yeah.
You're allowed to do that. Well, Aaron, did you want to close this down and then I'm going to escort him over to sign all these books that we have over at the center.
You can buy more than one if you like.
Okay, hopefully this is whetted your appetite for the book, and I know where you can buy one. So please join me in thanking our speakers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay. We'll go out this way. Yeah.